Hello, and welcome to week number 2. My name is Dr. Self. I'm a professor in ACU's doctoral program in organizational leadership, and I'll be your host for the rest of the weekly videos in this class. Through the rest of this course, we're going to try to understand what knowledge is. In the first couple of weeks, we'll unpack a definition of knowledge. In the second part, we'll discover ways in which we encounter errors of knowledge, and in the final part of this course, we'll explore how we deal with those errors and how our participation in the process of education can change the world around us. When I was a kid, our family took vacations four-wheeling through the mountains in southern Colorado. We'd load up the Jeep every summer and head out for a couple weeks of camping, trail riding, and sometimes a little gold mining. My dad always packed a toolbox. Dad was a mechanic, so that was not all that strange, but the Jeep was notorious for breaking down on us. At least once every trip, Dad would have to lug his big toolbox out of the Jeep and work his magic to get us back on the trail. On one occasion, however, Dad met a problem he couldn't fix. We kids played in the meadow for a long time while Dad disconnected and reconnected many parts under the hood. He just couldn't get the Jeep to start. My sister Rachel, who was about 6 years old at the time, suggested that Dad might want to put water in the battery. As odd as this may sound, that was a thing. There was often a cap on top of the battery where one could fill the cells with water. I guess Rachel heard someone somewhere talking about putting water in the battery. So, between sessions of tag, or throwing rocks, or climbing trees on the edge of the meadow, Rachel would run by the Jeep and repeat, "The battery probably needs water." Eventually, when Dad was totally exasperated, he went ahead and opened the cap on the battery. He decided to try adding a little water to the battery mostly because he was tired and wanted a break from climbing under the engine. Sure enough, the Jeep started right up. Of course, Rachel was intolerable from that day forward. Her remedy had worked for this one situation, so she offered the same advice no matter the problem. Flat tire? Add water to the battery. Out of gas? Add water to the battery. Axle broken in two? You got it. This scenario exposes a problem we have in defining what it means to know something. Philosophers have historically tried to define what knowledge is. Socrates and Laches argued whether we know how words like courage should be defined. Plato was fascinated by how we can know things that are not observable, like a Pegasus is a winged horse. We can come up with all kinds of ideas and thoughts that might not be knowledge. So there are three major elements that help us think about what knowledge is. Is it true? Do I believe it? And is my belief in that truth justified? The first element is that of truth. If something is false and I believe it, it's not knowledge. If I believe that the moon is made of cheese, but it isn't true, then I don't have knowledge. Even if I have a good reason for believing that the moon is made of cheese, it looks like cheese, it's still not knowledge. Things have to be true. The second element of knowledge is that of belief. Imagine that I believe that the earth is flat. No kidding. I have a cousin, let's call him Ralph, who's done a lot of mushrooms in the past. Ralph claims that he believes the earth is flat. In that case, Ralph does not have knowledge because he doesn't believe what is true. Another way to look at this is when we don't know to believe in a truth. For example, it has always been true that in a right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But I didn't have knowledge of that until my 7th grade math class, where I learned to believe it. The third element of knowledge is that of justification. Remember my little sister Rachel? It was true that the battery needed water. She believed that the battery needed water. But she was 6. She had no faculty with engines. Her claim was not justified. That's why Dad ignored her. He knows engines, she doesn't. Even if she was right in this one instance, the fact that she continued to believe it in other instances demonstrates that she didn't really know. She happened to believe something that was true, but we'd say she got lucky. For another example of justification, think back to your math class again. Remember when your teacher made you show your work? Your math teacher was not content that you knew how to factor a quadratic equation unless you could demonstrate that you have the ability to justify your answer, that you didn't just guess and get lucky, or copy the answer from your neighbor. Justification is going to be a big issue for us in this class. How do we justify beliefs, especially when we're trying to discover what is true? Ruggiero, the author of our textbook, asserted that truth is something we can discover. The question for us is whether we are able to develop effective means of justification to formulate beliefs to uncover what is true. As a way of coming back full circle, let's imagine that Rachel had a great deal of experience working on cars. She might have said, "Dad, I've been reading a lot of service bulletins about Delco batteries, which suggest that the batteries need water more often than other brands. Moreover, I noticed that when you tried to close the circuit at the starter, you got no spark, which means that there's no current headed to the connection posts. Finally, if you'll note, we've changed altitude significantly in the past couple of hours, so the relative humidity in the air is significantly lower in this location. All of these points of data lead me to believe that the battery needs water." Then, believing what is true would seem like knowledge to us, correct? In discussion this week, you will try to understand what may be true through evidence or justification. In the assignment, you're going to focus more explicitly on belief. But as you go through these exercises, understand that this is leading us to a method for gaining knowledge, something I'd wager you'd expected to happen when you came to college.